And the question becomes, who's the greatest professional wrestling bookers of all time? You already know who it is. Diablo, Diablo, Diablo TV. Like and subscribe, do things you're supposed to do. And for those people who don't know what a pro wrestling booker is, it's a long story because there's also writers. And then you also got people who own a wrestling promotion. So it's you got to look at what is a booker. And then I was taught in the traditional Florida way of what it means to be a booker within the professional wrestling business. Understand? So I'm gonna just get into it. For those of you who don't know, you should know. Look it up. Booker. And then it becomes who's the best bookers of all time. And then it becomes who's the greatest booker now, taking it into the future. The last of the bookers. Is Derek Diablo the last of the bookers of the old school? Let's see. I got the lineage. Now then, on this list, and I plan to do more of these type of videos, and I could go a lot more. I could go a lot more. 10 was easy. I did 10 in a second. Number 1, Vince McMahon Jr. Bomb, and then you start going to where's Vince McMahon Sr.'s place, other guys, Vern Gagne, old time bookers and stuff like that. You can go deep with this, but let's just say Vince McMahon Jr., number 1 booker of all time, and the rest ain't in the order. But let's say Vince McMahon Jr. number 1, WWF, WWE. But he's more than a booker to me. He's like George Lucas. He got his own universe. You know, it's not the same as other wrestling company. He owns those gimmicks of Undertaker. He ons those gimmicks. Razor Ramon and Diesel. You feel me? So he owns a universe, and WWE, WWF is a universe. So then he's like George Lucas sitting at the top. They got loads of different writers writing out the stories, and he decides at the top what's gonna fly and what's not gonna fly. Boom. So Vince McMahon Jr. number 1. Say no more. Number 2, Eddie Graham, Florida Championship Wrestling. I'm from Florida. I go by the territory system and the flavors and the history of the territories. Eddie Graham, rest in peace, he taught Dusty Rhodes. Eddie Graham taught my teacher, Rusty Brooks, who taught me in pro wrestling and taught me pro wrestling booking, apart from the pro wrestling itself. You feel me? He taught me the booking element of it. Privately. Later, after I studied with him and everything like that, gave me the Luthez manuscript. You feel me? So I learned, although I didn't agree with all the things and I had my own way of seeing it, he knew what I was trying to do with it, with the shoot wrestling. But he groomed me and he trained me as a Florida professional championship wrestling from Florida booker. So Eddie Graham, number 1. Number 2, excuse me, I got it on the list. Going on, and I'm gonna give them numbers, but they're not in order of greatness. But let's say the first 3 are. Dusty Rhodes, Virgil Runnels, rest in peace, the greatest wrestler of all time. Some people criticize his booking style and his way of doing things business-wise is what it is, and the dusty finish. People don't like that dusty finish. I like the dusty finish. Once I realized it was him who's coming up with those, I always like those kind of finishes. So Dusty Rhodes, number 3. Number 4, Playboy Gary Hart, World Championship Wrestling, Texas. So I see now, you know, now that we have all the information out there on the internet, shoot interviews, Dark Side of the Ring, everything else, you got that Fritz von Erich was running things, you know what I mean? But then they got the other chap who's a referee, but Gary Hart, you understand? Gary Hart, that was all the best times of World Championship Wrestling, World Class Championship Wrestling, all the best characters, heel characters and everything, him himself. Bomb, Gary Hart, for sure. One of the best of all time. He was definitely the booker of Texas, World Class Championship Wrestling, Texas territory. And great Kabuki, Bruiser Brody, a lot of guys he had in there. On down. Ole Anderson. Now, I didn't realize I never really liked Ole Anderson in wrestling, but as a fan and looking at him as a character. But he ran Georgia Championship Wrestling, and Florida and Georgia Championship Wrestling was connected. Feel me? Both had Gordon Soley, and we shared a lot of the same talent. Bomb. And then that's Atlanta. That becomes WCW, right, with the North Carolina territory. Whatever it is, Ole Anderson, I'm going to give him his respect because he was the booker of Georgia Championship Wrestling for a long period when it was at its best, and when I was influenced by a lot of it, likes of Tommy Wildfire Rich, you feel me, Barry Windham, a lot of guys that ended up going further. Ole Anderson, I got him at number 5. Number 6, Jim Cornette. Jim Cornette's probably my favorite, or one of my favorite of all time personalities. Midnight Express, the great Jim Cornette. You know, I'm glad to see now he's getting his due with the Dark Side of the Ring and everything like that. You know, that whole joke he made that got him kicked out of whatever it was, MLW. It was a bit funny, that whole saga. But Jim Cornette, one of the greatest minds of all time, one of the people I respect the most, one of the people I admire the most, one of my favorites of all time, his series with Dusty Rhodes. Yeah, Jim Cornette. Much respect. I'd love to work with that man, to have him aboard in a new sport, new version of pro wrestling that I have in mind. Now then, along those lines, Florida and elsewhere, Kevin Sullivan. I never realized how good Kevin Sullivan was. Never realized he was a booker and all that back then, and until the time I got into the pro wrestling business. But in retrospect, Kevin Sullivan, living the gimmick, walking around. That's the thing. Florida, Eddie Graham said, "Make it real." Make it real. So that was the Eddie Graham, Florida thing. Kevin Sullivan, they were walking around wearing those robes and everything like that, playing the gimmick in the street, the supermarket. So Kevin Sullivan, got him at number 7. Number 8, Eric Bischoff, Eazy-E. I love that whole NWO, WCW era. He was responsible for that. He was in the NWO. Yeah, whatever, he made good or bad decisions on where was he spending Ted Turner's money correctly? Was he, working too much with Hollywood Hulk Hogan with the politics? Whatever it is, he deserves his place. Changed wrestling forever. Bomb. Yeah, Eazy-E, Eric Bischoff, and I'm interested to see what he does moving forward. And I've seen some of his stuff. Whatever. He's somebody I'd like to work with. On the other side of him, Vince Russo, number 9. I never liked this Vince Russo chap, to tell you the truth, but I like him more now that I see more about him. And then those two guys are like the antithesis of one another. Or let's say they don't like each other. There's a history and their approach of doing things. So then with this sports entertainment, with the boxing, I'm looking to take it to a Vince Russo level. What I didn't realize he had this name. Saw on Dark Side of the Ring. I didn't realize they had this term, Smash TV. He says short match, backstage fight, vignette, short match, backstage fight, vignette. I'll apply that same formula to boxing. Any sport, MMA, UFC. So I'm not saying I respect all the ideas that Vince Russo came out with. And he's a writer. He's not coming from the wrestling side of it. That's where you start having people who are writers and television writers. He's not a booker. He's a writer. So that's different. Being a booker and crafting the characters long term and specific for pro wrestling, he was involved in throwing that out. So Rusty Brooks, rest in peace, when he was teaching me booking, he's like, they're killing the business. I'm like, yeah, but it's exciting, it's interesting. But it's what you call hot shotting. You put in a lot of cheap heat. You get an attraction for a lot of stuff that you're gonna have to try to top it. It's not. There's a reason the wrestling business worked for so long and made so much money. These guys killed it, and Vince Russo is one of them, and Eric Bischoff more than anybody else probably. And that has to leave us with number 10. That can go so much further. Paul Heyman, because in the ECW you can't mention Attitude Era, WWF. That's Vince Russo. Eric Bischoff, WCW, NWO era, the Luchadors. But it was the ECW. It was Paul Heyman who brought the Luchadors in first. And WCW poached them up. You feel me? So ECW, then bringing the hardcore wrestling out. And then that's continued to me by CZW. And they got a lot of Japanese stuff like that. But I think CZW is the best successor to ECW. But Paul Heyman for sure. And in the modern era with the Brock Lesnar and stuff, I don't really watch it anymore like that. I more watch shoot interviews and more stuff about like this. Then I can't really get into their modern product. Not to say that I don't want to be in WWE. I do. AEW, I do. I'd like to do a tour with them and get a push and go for a belt and da-da-da-da. But in the meantime, I'm going to leave it there. Comments below. If you know about pro wrestling booking, tell me who you think is the best, because I think that you're going to see Diablo before it's all said and done. It's going to be on that list. Jack.